far are you willing to go to acquire Greenland?
You'll find out.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate.
One way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
Donald Trump's demands shocked the world.
We have a fundamental disagreement with the United States of America concerning our own rights to self-determination.
We set out to uncover what's really behind the American president's pursuit of Greenland.
There's definitely a very eager audience for mining, minerals, rare earth, critical minerals.
This is almost like another battlefield, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Some would say that this is the new Cold War, or the new great powers competition.
The race for critical minerals has American interests eyeing Greenland, but also major projects in Canada.
I mean, in the perfect world, they shouldn't touch the area.
Is Canada giving away control of a vital resource? Is this a company that should be involved in such a key Canadian project?
Why not?
We reveal the people close to the president looking to cash in.
It doesn't matter who is invested in the companies. We control the assets. They're in the ground here.
But when a volatile and resource-hungry neighbor is involved, is it really that simple?
Are those projects Americans or Canadians? Who are they going to serve?
I'm Stephen D'Souza. This is The Fifth Estate. Even before he officially stepped back into the Oval Office for the second time, Donald Trump was sounding more like a conqueror than an incoming president.
Thank you very much.
With his sights set on Canada.
Why are we supporting a country, 200 billion plus a year, all of these other things? They should be a state.
But it wasn't his provocative comments about Canada that put the world on edge. It was what he was saying about another large, snow-covered piece of real estate.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes.
The self-governing Danish territory seemed to attract more than just a passing fancy from the president.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No, I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something.
It's not that you grow insensitive, but you sort of begin to expect it.
Ioanna Roumeliotis is Greenland's Minister for Trade and Mineral Resources. She says Trump's threats had a profound impact on residents.
I think it's been a process, like a grief process, with a lot of disbelief in the beginning, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of frustration, and I think then we had a period where there was a lot of anger as well.
Anger because in their mind, Greenland had long been a partner with the U.S., willing to work on issues of defense and trade.
We are willing to build projects that can benefit more than just Greenlanders. So for us, we are open to business, but we will not discuss or compromise our own right to self-determination.
So what was behind Trump's bluster? We have to go back to 2018, 8 years ago. Talk of Greenland then was confined to a select few.
Hi, how you doing?
Hello, Ambassador, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. I'm Stephen. John Bolton was Donald Trump's national security advisor during the first administration, and one of those in the know on Greenland.
Well, he called me down to the Oval Office one day late in 2018 and said that a prominent New York businessman that he knew had suggested that the U.S. buy Greenland. What did I think of it?
That prominent businessman, billionaire Ronald Lauder. A longtime friend and financial donor to the president, he's an heir to the Estee Lauder fortune. Last year, he wrote about Greenland, a place where he has business interests. He promoted the territory's wealth of critical minerals. Critical minerals are in the electronics we use every day, from cell phones to electric car batteries. They are a series of elements that are necessary in the push for cleaner technology. They are used in wind turbines and in solar panels. Within that group are rare earth elements, also found in high-powered magnets for advanced weapon systems, from the F-35 jet to submarines, to hypersonic weapons and precision-guided missiles. But right now, China controls most of the world's supply, so Trump wants to break that stranglehold on the market, looking to grab critical minerals wherever he can get them.
We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. I'd like to buy minerals on Russian land too, if we can. The rare earth. They have very good rare earth also. They both do.
For Bolton, a well-known hawk amongst Republicans, going after critical minerals makes strategic sense.
We shouldn't simply accept that China or anybody else has us by the throat when it comes to these minerals if we're willing to look around.
Back in 2018, Bolton says they were working quietly, behind the scenes, to come up with a way to increase U.S. influence in Greenland.
He agreed that we could have some very quiet contacts with Denmark about security in Greenland and the Arctic generally. And in particular, we had zero discussion about the use of force.
Bolton says a meeting was scheduled in August 2019 with the Prime Minister of Denmark. But then, the Wall Street Journal broke the story that Trump wanted to acquire Greenland.
I didn't know where it came from. I learned later that at Mar-a-Lago during 2019, Trump had asked many members of Mar-a-Lago what they thought about buying Greenland. And I think that's where the story came from.
What had been quiet and exploratory became loud and, in typical Trump fashion, incendiary.
Well, President Trump has used the term nasty in reference to yet another woman. This time it is the prime minister of a foreign ally, specifically Denmark.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen rejected the idea, and that set Trump off.
I looked forward to going, but I thought that the Prime Minister's statement that it was absurd, it was an absurd idea, was nasty.
After he called the Prime Minister of Denmark a nasty woman, he did a posting on Twitter, I think, a picture of Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, with a golden Trump tower in it, and the caption was, "I will never do this to Greenland," when you know what he was thinking of was doing exactly that to Greenland. I think there's every reason to believe if we could have kept it out of Yankee Stadium with the floodlights on, that there was a deal there.
Fast forward to 2025. Trump's takeover threats put Greenland back in the headlines, and the MAGA world was eager to be the first wave of the invasion.
I want to give you in this audience an exclusive update of what I was up to this last 24 hours. Donald Trump Jr., a very good friend of mine, gave me a call and said, "Hey, do you want to come to Greenland?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds great."
The president's son, Don Jr., made a highly publicized trip, posing with MAGA-curious Greenlanders welcoming his presence.
But we're really excited to be here. Thank you guys so much.
Another person in Trump's orbit, mixing their private interest with the president's policies. A few weeks later, Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife made another high-profile trip to Greenland.
China and other nations are taking an extraordinary interest in Arctic passageways and Arctic naval routes, and indeed in the minerals of the Arctic territories. We need to ensure that America is leading in the Arctic.
Of course, we don't negotiate on our right to sovereignty. That's not an issue we negotiate on. So we're used to dealing with national security issues or trade issue, but we are not as used to dealing with imperialistic ideas.
Coming up, the American thirst for critical minerals isn't just targeting Greenland. U.S. interests with close ties to Trump have been looking at a vast supply right here in Canada.
When you look at who's taking the actual decisions, you see that there are very, very close relationship with the Pentagon and the President Donald Trump.
Toronto is the mining finance capital of the world. More mining companies are headquartered in Canada than anywhere else, so the industry's annual convention here is a big deal. Critical minerals are top of mind for many at this event, as developers, politicians, and power brokers look for the next big project to counter China's dominance. In the crowd, a former U.S. Special Forces soldier, now on the front lines of President Trump's mission to acquire critical minerals. Drew Horn has a direct line to the White House. He's a founder and CEO of Greenmet.
Our next guest is spearheading private investment efforts in Greenland.
Over the last year, Horn has been on the airwaves hyping critical minerals in Greenland.
What President Trump is offering is billions of dollars of investment in the form of private investments and projects, all of which we're looking at that span from AI data centers to multiple rare earth and critical minerals projects.
His business pitch echoes Trump's talk of a takeover.
I mean, the sky is the limit, and everybody benefits from this.
He made time for us in D.C. after some high-level meetings. Your team had mentioned you were at the Pentagon and White House. Was that today?
Yeah, today and yesterday.
How'd those meetings go?
Good, thanks.
What'd you talk about?
A lot of the projects we're working on. We want to make sure that it's supporting, U.S. policy goals.
From serving in the U.S. military to advising the vice president in the first Trump administration, Horn has helped shape U.S. policy.
What I was essentially the evaluator for the White House on technologies and projects that were deemed worthy of government support and financing.
Mr. President!
Horn's Greenmet co-founders show how closely he's linked to the president. There's former Trump Organization lawyer George Sorial and Keith Schiller, Trump's longtime bodyguard. Those names are among the company's biggest assets. Greenmet doesn't mine or process minerals. They broker deals involving business and government.
Keith and George, were, fundamental in helping us get the company up and running. They're now passive shareholders.
Horn has made numerous trips to Greenland, promoting a potential rare earth mine in the south and a proposed AI data center in the north. But Greenland's mining minister says Horn is missing one key connection. So have you met Drew Horn before?
I haven't met him personally, but of course we have meetings with him as we have with any other interested investor into Greenland.
Do you think people with business interests are pushing Trump's imperialistic tendencies?
I don't know. I cannot speak to that, but I can, of course, identify that all these different agendas are at play.
She says there are challenges to mining in Greenland: harsh weather, lack of infrastructure, and strict environmental rules. Despite the pitch from people like Horn, right now there are just 2 mines, and neither involves critical minerals.
I'm not aware of any projects, concrete projects moving forward on his side. I'm aware, of course, of the discussions around them, but I haven't seen anything tangible yet.
There are going to be critics and people watching this who are going to say that these are just people in Trump's orbit trying to take advantage of the situation to make money. What do you say to that?
I can understand the skepticism. I can understand the strong emotions, even the anger that I believe is driven just by misunderstandings. I'm happy to be fully transparent, to basically show, while within full legal compliance with what I'm allowed to disclose and when, how we plan to do this and with who, and all of those details that would demonstrate this is real and not some sort of geopolitical stunt, as some would say.
Horn and his team aren't the only Trump connections looking for the next big project. The industry knows there's a gold rush of sorts. But what Canadians may not realize is the U.S. Department of Defense is pouring tens of millions of dollars into our mining industry.
Yeah, I know, it's critical. Yeah. Minerals, no less. Yeah, no, it's important. So I appreciate you being here.
A House of Commons Defense Committee held hearings this month. Rodrigue Turgeon is with Mining Watch, an environment and human rights group. Faced with Trump's calls to annex Canada, he wants Ottawa to be open about how it will handle foreign access and control of Canada's critical minerals.
If that's not a threat, what is a threat? That's why today we ask the government to be clear on their analysis of the situation. If it's a matter of national defense or national security, they have to act upon it.
Turgeon's group is out with a new report. In it, they found the Pentagon has invested at least $62.6 million US in projects located across Canada. We've also been independently digging into the numbers. An analysis by the Fifth Estate found even more investments by the Department of Defense, another $260 million. One of the companies targeted for funding is a rare earth processor called Ucore, based in an unassuming office building in Halifax.
Rapid SX is at least 3 times faster, allowing for more...
It's touting new separation technology that speeds up processing rare earths, but for years it struggled to get funding. In 2023, the U.S. Department of Defense under President Joe Biden came along. The hope is Ucore can help break China's processing monopoly. So far, the Pentagon has injected more than $22 million US. That's paid for a prototype in Kingston, Ontario, and plans for a commercial processing facility on a former U.S. military base in Louisiana. We reached out for an interview, but Ucore didn't want to sit down with us. We did, however, talk to one of their boosters, Drew Horn.
Obviously, we're big fans of what Ucore is looking to do in Louisiana and elsewhere. I think the processing, especially midstream, is the big gap. And so you obviously need to find solutions throughout the chain.
Horn helped facilitate a deal between Ucore and a proposed mine in Greenland, although the mine is still years away from actual production. We've seen the Department of War invest in quite a few Canadian companies. Is that something that you've been consulted on or consulted with?
Yeah, we've been big advocates for consideration of Canada as a domestic consideration for Department of War programs, which they've had for quite some time. And we think that's the right way to approach it.
At a time when the Prime Minister wants to move away from U.S. dependence, critics say our mining sector appears to be exempt.
Where's going to stand the Canadian government there? Is he going to support its communities, First Nations, or the foreign interests of the U.S. administration that is threatening to annex Canada to access the rare earth? Once you are establishing who's the threat, you have to come up with legislative changes to make sure that those companies are not actively present in the mining cycle, in the mining industry, in the mining system in Canada, and that's not what we're seeing.
As we kept examining U.S. encroachment into Canada's mining sector, once again, we found Drew Horn, linked to a major deal. Turns out he also helped a large U.S. private equity firm take a stake in what could be Canada's biggest ever rare earth operation.
That was one of the kind of key milestones or key sort of examples of U.S.-Canadian collaboration that we think can be a continued blueprint to double down on with other projects.
But is it collaboration or control? As we'll show you, the deal in Quebec involves another company with close ties to Trump, raising the question, who benefits from the rare earths mined here? How much is being dictated by those interests and not from offices in Quebec?
Everything lies on Canada's side. Canadian interests here depend on what Canada wants to do with the project.
This windswept and snow-covered landscape isn't Greenland, but it is a place American interests have targeted in their push for critical minerals.
This is the biggest ore port in North America, so this is really where the action is.
We're in Sept-Îles in eastern Quebec, but we're not here to see the iron ore. We're here for another project, one with links to the Trump White House that Radio-Canada's Albin Normandin says is drawing local attention.
So Métaux Tringat is a big project. It intends to exploit a huge, an important mineral pit of rare earth elements up north, about 250 kilometers north of Schefferville in Nunavik.
What was the initial sales pitch to people here? How were they selling it to them?
It was mostly about renewables, windmills, electric vehicles, batteries. There's a lot of demand for rare earth elements in those sectors, that's for sure. But that was the initial pitch, yeah.
The proposed project is in Nunavik, northern Quebec. Rare earths would be extracted from a massive open pit mine. Up to 13 million metric tons of material would be trucked along a newly built road every year for 30 years. It would then be shipped down to Sept-Îles for processing. If built, it would be the largest rare earth mine in Canada.
So the vision with Strange Lake is to build in Canada, in Quebec in particular, an extraction to refined value chain that would make Canada and Quebec unique as the main alternate source to the Chinese monopoly, something the Western world is eagerly awaiting.
When we sat down for this interview at the end of February, Quebec businessman Yves Leduc had been CEO of Torngat Metals for about 11 months.
We have enough capacity to supply the needs for heavy rare earth of the entire G7 ecosystem.
That much, just from this one?
Yes.
If everything goes according to plan, I guess.
Everything will go according to plan because the project is so important.
The worldwide attention on critical minerals put Torngat in the spotlight, but that wasn't always the case. In 2018, an earlier version of the company had financial trouble. Torngat was rescued 4 years later by $50 million from one of the largest private equity firms in the US, Cerberus Capital Management.
Without Cerberus, the company probably wouldn't be around today. So they saw the opportunity and decided to invest, and that capital allowed the team to bring the project to the stage that it is today.
But who is Cerberus?
I'd like to thank the President of the United States, President Trump, for his nomination.
That's former Cerberus CEO and founder Steven Feinberg, a major Trump donor. The president picked the billionaire to be the #2 man at the Department of Defense. He's overseeing the Pentagon as it invests millions of dollars into Canadian mining operations. We did some digging. In his government ethics filings, Feinberg disclosed millions of dollars in Torngat stock, which Cerberus told us is now in a qualified blind trust. But while Feinberg shuns the spotlight, companies Cerberus has controlled have made headlines for the wrong reasons. The operatives who later killed a journalist were reportedly trained by a Cerberus-owned company. They faced a public backlash for owning the company that made the gun used in one of America's deadliest mass shootings. And another of its companies was charged in a kickback scheme. Is this a company that should be involved in such a key Canadian project?
Why not? We have one of the most amazing opportunities in Canadian mining history. We have the means to make it happen. Those means involve the capital that came from Cerberus.
In Sept-Îles, the Trump connection became the story.
I think for the people in Sept-Îles, the American part is important because U.S. tariffs have hit hard in the region, in the forestry sector, the aluminum sector as well, and I think the U.S. is gaining a bad image here.
This company is doing everything it could to give the idea of it's effectively developed by people based in Quebec. When you look at who's taking the actual decisions, you see that there are very, very close relationship with the Pentagon and the President Donald Trump.
Adding to the concerns in Quebec, Radio-Canada revealed former Trump official Tom Gilman was chairman of Torngat's board.
My role right now is chairman of Torngat Metals, and Torngat is basically the largest deposit of heavy rare earth minerals outside of China.
He worked for Chrysler for a number of years, and then he went to work for the Trump administration. And then he left and participated in the very controversial Project 2025.
Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for government. Gilman wrote controversial sections calling for major cuts to climate change research.
I've had a long 20-year relationship with Cerberus.
A very different message than what he was telling local communities about Torngat's goals.
It is incredibly important to us that we understand this, we respect them. We are on their lands, we understand that, and we are in their environment, and we have to be respectful of that.
Tom Gilman was connected to Project 2025. When you talk about having a very environmentally focused project, how does that square when you have a now former chairman of the board who holds these views?
He's the former chairman of the board. He's actually the person who brought the opportunity to Cerberus back in 2022. That's all I need to know about him.
He left the company just days after the Radio-Canada story.
Torngat was pretty clear that there was no link between the two things, our peace and his departure.
You mentioned Tom Gilman is no longer the chair of the board. That came very close to when the story first came out about his involvement in the company. Were those two connected?
As I said, Maryse Bélanger was hired in July, and she was appointed to eventually become the chair. Tom Gilman was past his normal retirement age and was happy to step down.
Is he still involved in the company?
Not at all.
Merci, Maryse.
With so much attention on the project, the 6 different Indigenous groups in the region surrounding the mine and residents of Sept-Îles want to know as much as they can about its potential impacts.
I mean, in the perfect world, they shouldn't touch the area.
Maggie Amudluk is chair of the Kativik Regional Government. Her community, downriver from the mine site, now finds itself in the middle of the global rush for critical minerals. What are your concerns about this project?
Wildlife, the migrating caribous, the migrating birds, the salmon, the diet. If they're harmed, then we're going to be harmed.
She says the mine site will be as big as their entire community. But she notes their region is covered by a treaty signed in the 70s with strong environmental guidelines for any new project.
Any kind of development, including mining, if it was ever to be developed, there has to be consultations.
Cerberus is fully aligned behind our environmental indigenous strategy. There's no question. The capital that's being raised is largely about making sure that our technologies are appropriate and designed so as to protect the environment. That's not even a question.
The question is, who really benefits?
Torngat Metals has entered into an MOU with VAC, which is a leader in global rare earth magnets, a lesson that our partners to the south, the Americans, have learned about the vulnerabilities in the rare earth magnet supply chain.
Last year, the Prime Minister highlighted a deal Torngat signed with a German company to provide rare earths.
EVAC Magnetics has shipped its first rare earth magnets for commercial use.
That company, though, has a deal with the U.S. Department of Defense. They'll take Canadian material and send it to a facility in South Carolina to make magnets for F-35 fighters, drones, and other weapons.
How are you, Drew?
Good, thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Remember White House ally Drew Horn? He connected Cerberus and Torngat, and he says Trump's pick at the Pentagon, Stephen Feinberg, is primed for more.
Anytime there's a business case for U.S.-Canadian collaboration, you're going to find overwhelmingly supportive folks, especially in this Pentagon, right? And so, if my colleague Steve Feinberg came to rare earth for the first time with a Canadian-U.S. Joint venture and collaboration, you can bet that he appreciates the possibility and opportunity that represents in other projects. And so I think there's a even greater appreciation for U.S. Canadian collaboration now.
Thank you. National Program Co-Lead for Mining Watch Canada.
Critics like Mining Watch say the feds and companies like Torngat need to be transparent about who benefits from the minerals dug up in Canada.
Let's be clear on that and do not cheat the population, because if that project is really for national defense, then say it.
Leduc insists the U.S. stake in their project is a positive.
It's a Canadian project that happens to have been believed by an American firm. The more interest the U.S. administration shows in Torngat, the greater the leverage for Canada, and that's actually a good thing.
He says their plan will live on past the current president's threats to make Canada the 51st state.
That's not going to last. In the end, this project will be in operation after the next election in the U.S. And we need to keep our focus on what's really important here. The world needs the Strange Lake project to be a success, okay? And we are committed to doing it right.
The project may last, but Leduc himself did not. 9 days before our broadcast, Torngat announced he had decided to step down. The company said he wanted to focus on other work and his personal life.
Thank you.
When we come back, we take a hard look at the Canadian government's support for an American-owned mine.
So would you propose we not put those cards in our hands? Would you think
No,
we'd
I'm
be
just
strong?
saying-
Would
I'm
you,
just
would you
saying
think we would be
perhaps we don't.
stronger if we didn't have those cards?
I just think maybe those cards aren't as strong as you're saying they are. At the mining conference in Toronto, where the federal government's announcements around critical minerals drew big crowds, Canada seized the moment.
We are so very pleased to have you joining us today. Minister, the podium is yours.
Tim Hodgson, Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, came armed with a slew of funding announcements and agreements, and echoed his boss's realpolitik message heard around the world.
There's an obvious elephant in the room these days. We are at a hinge moment in Canadian history. In fact, the whole world is experiencing what our Prime Minister so aptly called a rupture in the world order.
Like Prime Minister Mark Carney, Hodgson is a former executive at Goldman Sachs. Both are eager to make deals with the world to lessen Canada's dependence on the U.S.
Ultimately, access to your own critical minerals, access to your own energy is sovereignty, is strength, is security.
But for all the talk of independence, U.S. companies are very much in the picture. Last summer, before these photo ops, the government had already made a major commitment to Torngat. Ottawa handed out $165 million in loans to the Strange Lake project in northern Quebec. The backing comes years before most permits have been issued, and before the required environmental assessments. The government calls their financing first of its kind and unprecedented.
All of us watched Mr. Zelensky being lectured about how he had no cards. Canada has great cards. We need to play those cards well. Our critical minerals are those key cards.
He's a man that knows what he wants.
But how much leverage does Canada really have when a firm close to Trump has a significant stake in what's being promoted as a game-changing Canadian mine?
Can we have the right to say no to some of those projects? Can we have the right to say yes, but to some of those projects? And can we make sure that those projects will benefit Canadian interests?
Look, we are in a world where world powers, hegemons, are using supply chains and our economic integration to get what they want. The way we diversify against that is we bring our own resources to market. We welcome foreign investment from responsible parties.
Are companies like Cerberus with strong ties to the Trump administration, do they fit that description?
When the investment is done in a responsible way, there are Canadian investors in Torngat as well.
But, I mean, Cerberus does have quite a large portion of the company. Was there a national security review done when Cerberus made that investment in Torngat?
I don't have that particular answer.
We checked, but the federal ministry responsible would not tell us if in fact they had conducted a national security review of the American investment in Torngat. They said, under the Investment Canada Act, that information is private. As Drew Horn looks for the next deal, he says Canada and the U.S. must stay united to counter China's monopoly. This is almost like another battlefield, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Some would say that this is the new Cold War or the new great powers competition.
Canada is a mining nation. And after years of delays and uncertainty, ladies and gentlemen, we are back.
But as Canada tries to chart a new path, how much Pentagon investment is too much? Do you look at, Department of War investments in Canadian companies and say, maybe we should limit this, or is there a stage where it becomes too much?
So the U.S. has been our largest trading partner. We will continue to trade with the United States. We will continue to trade with them when it benefits Canada. What we're focused on doing is growing our relationship with other countries. That puts cards in our hands.
I mean, the Prime Minister has talked about a new world order and shifting our focus away from the U.S., but it seems in this industry, it's still sort of the old world order.
Absolutely not. In a world where the strong want to do as they may and the weak do what they must, we're going to make sure we're not in that category of doing what we must. Those are cards in our hands.
But I think, when we signed free trade agreements with the United States, we thought we had cards in our hand back then. And, as much as you say we have leverage, can we have leverage when the U.S. administration just decides suddenly it wants to take our critical minerals?
So would you propose we not put those cards in our hands? Would you think
No,
we'd
I'm
be
just
strong?
saying-
Would you think we would be stronger if we didn't have those cards?
I just think maybe those cards aren't as strong as you're saying
I
they
think
are.
it's a lot better to have those cards than not have those cards. And that's why we're working hard to create those cards. Again, as the Prime Minister said, we need to engage in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Having control of critical minerals, having control of the energy resources we have, where we're a energy and natural resource superpower, gives us the ability to look after ourselves in this challenging world we're in right now.
But there are no guarantees. Just ask world leaders like Venezuela's former dictator, Nicolas Maduro.
It was the greatest theft in the history of America. Nobody has ever stolen our property like they have. They took our oil away from us.
When Trump changes the rules and decides to take what he wants, having resources can also make you a target. Meanwhile, communities around the Torngat project wonder, with millions of public dollars committed, is it a done deal? What message does that send to you and your community that they're putting so much money in at such an early stage?
When we hear this, we just look at each other and say, wow, this is really serious. Like, they're not just playing a game here. It's going to have to lead to something very serious.
It's a gambling play. It's not certain that this project will see the light.
Mining Watch's Rodrigue Turgeon says the federal government should slow down.
Why are you putting so much pressure? Why are you giving so much leverage and means to a company that has not even started yet to have real discussion with all the indigenous communities?
Does it essentially say this is a done deal, we want this to go through, even though they haven't really had their say on the environmental assessments?
Absolutely not. Any proponent who ultimately brings a project to production needs to ultimately get support of First Nations. That's a core part of our government. Part of companies developing these resources is engaging with First Nations and Indigenous peoples of all types, Métis and Inuit as well. This is a normal process in any mine that we go through.
But it's not, though, because EDC said they've never really given this much money to a project that early, right? So
we've never been in a situation where one country controlled over 90% of the world's supply of critical minerals that are required to make all of the things we rely on as a society. We're doing things that are exceptional because we are in exceptional times. I'll go back to what the Prime Minister said. We are in a hinge moment. We are in a rupture. We need to respond to that.
Maggie Amudluck says the mine could help the region's economic prospects, but she says they still want to fully understand the impacts of the project.
They know that. They can't just bulldoze and start mining tomorrow because of the environment section that we have. It's a very strong one.
I don't see it as a poker card or a poker game. I just really want, genuinely to cooperate with other countries.
While Canada forges ahead, Greenland is taking a more cautious approach.
It's a slow business and it takes a lot of work, and that's why you don't see many succeed So it's not a lottery, but it's hard work.
While they welcome U.S. investment, Nathanielson says they won't compromise on their values. You're not going to be bullied or bulldozed over your environmental regulations just to allow these critical mineral projects to go forward?
Absolutely not, because if I did that, we would not have the backing of the people. As a politician, you also need to have the guts to say no to projects if you believe that that is the right thing in order to maintain the backing of the local people and communities. So for us, that's a really important issue, that if you want mining, you have to do it in a responsible way. And in this day and age, it does include taking environmental concerns seriously. So we're not going to change that.
So wonderful to see you all here for the formal opening of the Canadian Consulate in Nuuk, Greenland. Let's just raise our hands and clap for this day.
Greenland's experience mirrors its neighbors in northern Quebec. Two groups living in cold and pristine landscapes, both targets of America's insatiable appetite for resources. In February, amidst Trump's latest threats, Canada opened a consulate in the territory's capital, Nuuk. Maggie Amudluk was there.
Talking to the local Greenlandic Kalalid Nunangat, what they were talking about, the fear of war, you know, the actual, what could actually happen. We're not used to those kind of discussions locally. We're not part of these discussions, but we get to see in the news, and it's scary.
Back in northern Quebec, Innu in the region are going a long way to make their opposition clear. Groups have made the more than 200-kilometer journey by snowmobile from Schefferville. To the Torngat mine site, they made sure to make their presence known.
Hello.
A reminder that in the race for critical minerals and the high-stakes game of international politics, there are a lot of cards to play.
We know we have a voice. We have to have a voice. We can't be bulldozed. We're a people too.